Welcome to Your Next Best Chapter, a Central New Jersey divorce and family law podcast.
Welcome to Your Next Best Chapter, a Central New Jersey divorce and family law podcast with Ms. Laura M. Diorsi. Laura is a highly respected divorce and family law attorney based in Red Bank, New Jersey, with more than 30 years of experience helping individuals and families navigate divorce, custody, alimony, and other complex family law matters. I'm Evan Mack. In today's first episode, we're talking about what the divorce process really looks like in New Jersey. Laura will explain what to expect, how it unfolds, and how understanding the process early can help people move forward with more clarity and confidence. How you doing, my dear?
I'm good. How are you? Good morning.
I'm well. Laura, before we get into the process itself, can you share a bit about your background and kind of, how long you practice family law, what types of cases you focused on, and what led you to this work?
So I have been a lawyer for more than 30 years, and I have practiced matrimonial law for about 25 years. And all of my cases focus on divorce, custody, child support, and some divorce mediation. I got into this field because I was interested in helping people and working directly with them and helping them to move on to a different transition in their lives.
Amazing. So let's get to the topic today. What does the divorce process in New Jersey actually look like from start to finish in your experience?
Sure. So there's different ways we handle different cases. Sometimes we immediately file a complaint for divorce with the courts, and we proceed with the courts, and the other side has an attorney, and the court pretty much will dictate how the case proceeds when at the point where we're exchanging financial information, where we're appraising different properties, learning about different assets, learning about incomes, and that all happens through the court process. In other cases, sometimes we decide we don't really need to get the court involved in the very beginning, and we work with the other party in reaching an agreement where we just pretty much work on focusing on working with the other party, and we try to resolve all the different issues with just an agreement. And then at the end of the case, we file for divorce. So those are the two different ways that a case can proceed, either immediately filing a complaint for divorce and going through the courts, or working usually more amicably with the other party in reaching an agreement. And then at the end of the case, filing a complaint for divorce.
So how does a divorce formally begin in New Jersey? What usually happens in that early stages after all that paperwork is filed?
Sure. Well, it really begins when you file, like when you file for divorce and you file your complaint with the court, and then the other party has to be served formally with with the complaint and a summons, and then they have to respond, and then that's kind of, when the other person enters the case, then we proceed through the court. So the formal process is really when you file that complaint for divorce, and that actually stops the clock ticking with respect to the marriage as well.
Wow. So, Ms. Laura, what are the key decision points along the way where, early choices tend to shape how the rest of the case unfolds? What have you seen in your experience?
Well, I've seen a lot of different things. Sometimes people think, oh, well, we've separated and, we're living in two different houses. And they think that because of that, everything that happens after that point, they don't have to, they're basically divorced, but that's not really the case. When you're legally married, you're legally married to someone. So even if you live in separate homes, you still have the same obligations that you would have if you were together. So I think sometimes people think, oh, we're separate and we have separate bank accounts and, we're kind of keeping our everything separate. That's still not the case. That could still be viewed as part of the marital estate. So that, can definitely impact people. Sometimes they allow 5 or 6 years to go on when they're separated. And then they come to me and they say, well, I've been separated. And I say, well, that doesn't really matter. Your spouse is still entitled to part of your 401k that you acquired when you were separated. If you have stock options, they're still, entitled to those. So sometimes people have that misconception that, oh, we're separated, or, we've always maintained everything separate. That doesn't, the court doesn't, I mean, they might look at that as a factor, but there's still a lot of exposure there. And then also, if the other person might be accumulating a lot of credit card debt, that can also impact the person who's seeking the divorce, because they could potentially be responsible for that. Because when you're married, you're married, and when you're not married, you're not married.
So, Ms. Laura, how do different paths, such as that mediation you were talking about, mediation, collaborative divorce, or litigation, fit into the way New Jersey and that divorce process works? And how does that experience differ depending on, which route is chosen?
Sure, sure. So sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, we really want to mediate our case. So in
Mhm.
mediation, even though you may have an attorney or sometimes non-attorney mediating, they the person who is conducting the mediation cannot represent either party. So if you want legal advice when you are going through mediation, if I'm doing a mediation, I always tell people you really need to seek legal advice and consult with someone so that you understand what is happening, and so that you also are aware of all of your rights and things that you might be entitled to, because that's not really my job as a mediator. Um, so in mediation, we'll usually meet with the parties together, and sometimes we do it in person. Sometimes we can do it via Zoom. That's something new that kind of just happened after COVID. And then work with the parties to reach an agreement. And at the end of reaching an agreement or creating a memorandum of understanding, I then give that to them and I say, okay, now you have to go to, hopefully you've had a review attorney along the way the whole time, and they will finalize the agreement for you. And then one of the attorneys will file a complaint for divorce. So that's kind of how the mediation process goes. And it's usually helpful if the people are not very adversarial,
Yeah.
if we want mediation to work. The regular divorce process usually involves filing a complaint for divorce and proceeding through the courts. And then you're kind of on the court calendar with respect to deadlines and things that you have to do. And the attorneys have to appear for different court appearances. And, it's more not really your timeline, it's the court's timeline. And then collaborative divorce is where the parties agree we do not want to involve, it's basically, we always call it a no court divorce. So the parties both usually have attorneys who are trained in the collaborative process, and we work together sometimes with different experts, such as therapists or financial advisors, to help them reach an agreement. And then again, at the end of the case, we file the complaint for divorce. But in the collaborative process, you actually sign an agreement where it indicates that neither attorney will continue to represent you if you want to take this case to court to litigate it. So those are like three different ways that we can proceed. And, everyone chooses different methods of proceeding. So,
Yeah.
and I've handled all of those types of cases for people.
So speaking of that, you were talking about kind of time and the calendar, but in general terms, how long does divorce take, tend to take in New Jersey, and what kind of factors affect that timeline? Is it the things that you were speaking about before, or is it other things as well?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I always get this question. People ask me when I have like an initial consultation with them, and it always depends on the people,
Yeah.
because sometimes, people are at different stages in this process. One person may have decided 3 years ago that they want a divorce, and then over the Christmas holidays, they finally decided, oh, January 1, I'm telling my wife I want to get a divorce. So they're already so far along in their decision making, and then the other spouse is kind of like in shock, and they maybe didn't know anything was going on, they maybe didn't realize their marriage wasn't working out. And so it just always depends on the people.
Right.
So in a situation like that where people are just, one person is so much further ahead of the other, it can take a lot of time because the person who is kind of shocked by what's happening, they have to kind of accept what's happening and find an attorney and find out about what their rights are. And so that can dictate how long the process takes. Then there could be situations where both people are totally on the same page and they just say to each other, let's get a divorce this year. This is where we are. This marriage is not working out. And they may both be at the same point. And, they may actually talk to each other. They might say, okay, let's sell the house. Let's come up with this parenting schedule. They might do a lot of things on their own. And again, I always recommend people seek legal advice because you want to make sure you're doing everything the right way. But their time frame might be a lot quicker than the first couple where they're on just different timelines. So, but usually when you file for divorce in New Jersey, the court will not allow the case to take more than 1 year.
Okay.
Um, but sometimes people can be divorced within a month, and sometimes it goes beyond a year. So it really depends on the people and how cooperative they want to be with each other, giving the right financial information, letting each other know their income information, providing all of that to the attorneys. And, the people really have to be on board with wanting this process to be, I guess, timely for them. If they want to drag it out, it's going to be dragged out. So again, it really depends on the participants. And that's not something we can always control. I always say to my client, we can always control what we do, but we can't control what the other side does. So, a lot of it is just dictated by whether both parties want to work efficiently and cooperatively in getting through this process.
So once the divorce is finalized, what does the transition look like afterwards from a legal and maybe practical standpoint as someone moves into that next chapter of their life?
Well, lots of times the agreements that people make, they talk about what is going to happen, after the parties are divorced. So sometimes when they get divorced, they're still living in their marital home together. And the agreement talks about how the home will be put on the market for sale. And so sometimes they have to live through that after their divorce, or, and usually a lot of people are living together while they're going through divorce, which is really difficult. Sometimes people can't afford to have two homes to maintain during this process. So once they are divorced, then they are still kind of doing what we call the wrap-up things, like selling the marital home, talking to realtors, and doing the recommendations that the realtors indicate are going to help them walk away with more money. So sometimes we're dealing with that after the divorce, or sometimes one spouse buys the other out of the home and they have to refinance. And so we need to give time to the other person to do that, because that is usually a process. You have to get approved by your bank and make sure that you qualify and things like that. Also, after a divorce, we're usually dividing up retirement assets because they can't be divided until the people are actually divorced. So that is a process that takes place after the divorce. And then also it might be the first time that the person who's receiving alimony is getting that alimony and the other person is paying it. So that can be an adjustment because you're both now living separate financial lives. And if you're paying alimony, you have to figure out how you can budget yourself so that you have enough to live on for yourself in addition to paying the alimony or child support, or both. And then if you're receiving alimony and you've never really had a job outside the home, you're kind of also learning how to budget and financially support yourself now that you're no longer together. So, there is a lot of transition after the divorce. And, sometimes people do that during the process, and then sometimes a lot of those things don't happen until the people are actually divorced.
All right. Ms. Laura, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Alrighty, guys. That's it for today's episode of Your Next Best Chapter, a Central New Jersey Divorce and Family Law podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Miss Laura Diorsi and her family law practice, you can visit lauradiorcilaw.com. There you'll find helpful information about divorce to custody and other family law matters in New Jersey. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with anyone who may be navigating this process and looking for clear, steady guidance. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.